Good morning, everyone. Sorry for the slight delay there, and welcome to Ask the Agronomist. This this is a little bit of an experiment for us here this morning. So I am alone in the conference room here. So going solo this morning. A very busy week for sales team. Had a national sales meeting this week, and pretty exciting to learn things going into next year. So the sales team's been super busy this week, and both Adam and Jennifer were triple booked this morning. Dan Shaw is busy man in the Schuyler County Fair, so you got me by myself today. So Adam and Jennifer, I think, are both logged into the chat, so they can interact with you in the chat. I'm going to try to keep up with that and do content here. I'm just going to stay seated at the computer so I can see stuff coming in on the live chat. So we're just gonna talk here this morning, and got lots of stuff to go through. A lot of it relative to the drought and crop prospects and conditions and impacts that's having on the crop, impacts on your fungicide decisions. We'll talk about that. Hopefully, I'll be able to answer your questions as they come in. It is a little bit challenging for me to focus on the chat and look at the questions without it getting awkward for me trying to talk and read and look and keep up with stuff all at the same time. So we'll see how this works. We're going to learn one of two things today. We're going to learn that either I don't always need someone to help me do Ask the Agronomist, or this will be a horrible episode and will reinforce the fact that I do, in fact, need someone to help me do Ask the Agronomist. So we'll hope it's not the latter. But anyway, I do have a lot of things we want to cover today, and we'll just jump right in. So obviously, the elephant in the room for the past month or more has been the dry weather, and I think every 2 weeks when I'm on Ask the Agronomist, I say I hope we don't have to talk about this in 2 weeks because it has rained a whole bunch. Well, here we are 2 weeks later. It has not rained a whole bunch. In places, it has not rained at all. And we are still talking about the drought, the worsening drought, the possibly for some people, the driest June on record drought, and the possible impact it's having on the crop. So I'm going to show a picture here to start this off, I think. So here is what I think is a very interesting chart. Maybe you want to take a screenshot or take a picture of that so you can maybe study that later. But this goes through the growing season by crop growth stage and the amount of water per day that the crop is using in those various growth stages. So as you can tell, looking at that chart, when the crop is small, it's using a lot less water. And as we approach black layer or R6, it's using a lot less water. You can also see there's 3 periods in this plant's life where it's using the most amount of water. That would be right before tassel, during pollination, and right after pollination. So basically pre-tassel, tasseling or silking, and the R1 or blister stage would be the most critical part of that plant's life. And that's really the make or break time for these plants. We are entering into that time right now. If you planted further to the south and you planted really early, you might be in the middle of that window. Most of us are at the front end of that window, and we're going to be tasseling within the next 1 to 2 weeks. Tasseling is going to be very uneven in fields. You will have fields that it might take 2 weeks for the entire field to tassel. That's going to create a challenge for fungicide applications. We'll talk about that a little bit as well. But the amount of water that these plants need per day is entering into the maximum critical stage now. And, just to review my own chart here. So at silking, pollination, basically early tassel, silking, and blister, it's basically 1/3 of an inch a day if we round. And if you paid attention to that chart, you'll see the cumulative water usage gets up to amounts of rain that we don't even get during the growing season. And you think, well, if corn needs that much water, how do we ever grow as good a crop as we grow? Well, it's because our soil has the ability to hold, depending on soil type, 10 to 15 inches of plant available water. Speaking of plant available water, I've got another interesting chart that I want to show here that illustrates what plant available water means. So this is the chart that explains lots of things as well. It explains why rooting depth is important, and we'll talk about roots. It explains why soil type is important. And it explains why our crop looks as good as it does, considering how little rain that we've had. And if you look at the total water and you look at the wilting point, those two lines, and you see what they call available water in between, that's water that's available to the plant. So the plant cannot extract every single drop of moisture that's in the soil because it's held tightly by the soil. And the amount of water that's held tightly by the soil is that wilting point. And so clay soils bind water the tightest. And so clay soils don't have as much plant available water, not because they can't hold a lot of water. Clay can hold the most amount of water of any soil, but it also binds the most amount of water of any soil. So really heavy clay soils, even though they hold a lot of water, they hold a lot of the water so tightly that the plant can't get it. And then at the other end of the spectrum, you've got sand. Sand holds almost no water, but it also contains almost no water. So our sandy soils would be the least amount of plant available water. But notice on the other end of the spectrum, heavy clays have the second least amount of plant available water. And your good high organic matter silty clay loams would be there in the middle with a maximum amount of holding capacity of about 2.5 inches of plant available water per foot of soil. So let's think about that a minute. Let's say we've got a soil that, we're blessed with good soil. Going to be big differences this year between good soil and less than good soil. Some of those years where those of us that farm a lot of what I call good timber soil will say that good timber soil managed correctly can raise essentially the same yield in some cases as the best soil in the world. And you think, oh, gosh, I'm pretty smart because I didn't spend money renting or buying that really good ground. I bought this class B soil here and raised the same yield. Well, that's not going to happen this year. You're going to go A, B, C, D, and the drop off between A and B and A and C is going to be pretty dramatic. And it's back to this: how much plant available water does that soil have in it? So let's think about that for a minute. Let's say we've got the best soil in the world, and it has 2.5 inches of plant available water per foot of soil. And let's say your soil profile is 6 feet deep. So 6 times 2.5 is what? 15 inches. So you got 15 inches of stored up rain in your soil. That assumes what? That assumes you've got roots down to 6 feet. That means you've got a root mass that's capable of exploring that soil. And how often do we not have a root mass capable of exploring that soil? So let's look at a picture here sent to me by one of our reps. Now, obviously, that root mass is probably not going to do a good job of exploring 6 feet of soil. Now you might say, guys, somebody must have planted that in the mud. No, they didn't. Now, was there moisture in that soil when it planted? Absolutely. Was there enough moisture in that soil to compact it? Absolutely. Did they do anything horribly sinful compared to normal when they planted that field? No, I'm going to say probably not. Now, did they have more downforce than they needed on their row units to keep the planter in the ground at proper depth? Yes, they did. But that's kind of normal. And did we cause compaction of the sidewall with our planter? Yes, we did. But that's normal also. What's not normal is to never get enough moisture to soften up that compacted area of soil beneath our gauge wheels that's always there. And it's fairly common, even if you do everything right, the most mellow part of your cornfield is between the rows, not in the rows. There's oftentimes, even in a wheel track row, it's less compacted in the wheel track than it is right in the row, because the weight of the planter is being carried on the gauge wheels. And so in some cases, especially when we don't have a good downforce control system on our planter, or we had one, but we had it cranked up a little higher than we needed to, the most compacted part of a lot of cornfields is unfortunately right in the corn row. And in a year like this, where you don't get moisture to soften up that compacted soil to enable roots to grow through it, they don't grow through it. They grow around it. They grow down the seed furrow. They grow down the seed trench. You've heard hatchet roots and mohawk roots. I made a new term for these roots. That's a T-hawk root. So at some point in time, we had enough moisture for roots to proliferate at the surface. So that's why you've got that horizontal piece there. And then the roots that started growing straight down because they couldn't grow sideways so roots would naturally grow downward at about a 45-degree angle. And nodal roots are going to grow downward at about a 45-degree angle unless they can't. If they can't grow at all because you've got no seed to soil contact or you've got no soil moisture, you get rootless corn. This is not rootless corn. If this was rootless corn, you wouldn't have any of these nodal roots growing here that are growing laterally, and you wouldn't have, these are nodal roots here. They're not growing the way they wanted to grow, but they're growing. So that is not rootless corn. But those roots started growing down because they couldn't grow out. And I'm going to say that's primarily because of how dry we were. Now, did we do more compacting with our planter than we needed to in that situation? Yeah, possibly. This is not a bad looking field of corn. Yeah, is there some potassium deficiency there? Yeah, is there a little bit of stress showing up there? But I think there's probably more acres than people realize out there that might have a root mass that looks more like that than you would like it to. And really what that's doing is that is forcing that plant to explore less soil. Or it is not, in a better way to say that, the plant is unable to explore the total soil profile for moisture. So we're going to need rain, and a lot of it in a hurry. We have already used up, most of our soil profile of stored up water. Because if you look at, if you go back to that chart of how much rainfall, or not rainfall, but how much moisture, inches per day, and the total amount of moisture used per growth stage. So these growth stages all last multiple days. So if you're using a third of an inch of rain per day, a third of an inch of moisture per day for 10 days, that's 3.3 inches of rain you use to get, or moisture to get through that growth stage. We have not had 3.3 inches of rain in the last 3 months in some places. So that 3.3 inches of moisture that we use came from our soil reserve. The soil reserve has been used up. We are entering into the time of the plant's life when it's using a third of an inch per day. That third of an inch per day cannot come from the soil. It's not there. It's been used up. The plant doesn't have a good enough root system in some cases to access it. So that's going to have to come from rainfall. Yeah, I do not believe we can do a good job pollinating this crop without significant rain prior to or at least during pollination. Even if you get through pollination, you cannot save all the kernels on that ear without significant rain following pollination. So, there's been a lot of talk about, what's happened to the crop. There's an embryonic ear. You can go out in any field today. If you find the top ear shoot on the plant and you carefully dig it out of there, you can count kernels today if you want to. I don't recommend doing yield checks this early. Not very fruitful, but that's an 18 around ear. It has the potential probably to be, 36, 38, 40 long. Our yield potential has not been lost at this point. Now, how many of those kernels we can fill, how many of those kernels are going to abort, the size and depth of those kernels. Our corn, you've probably noticed your corn's pretty short, scary short in some cases. There will be fields of regular old, I'm not talking short corn here, regular old corn that I'll be able to see over the tassel. And I'm a skosh over 6 feet on a good day. So there's going to be a lot of corn that's tasseling out, shoulder high, head high. If you've got a field of corn that's 7 feet tall, it must be on some damn good soil in a creek bottom, or you've caught some more moisture. If you're looking at your corn and it's above your head, that's pretty tall corn for my area for the growing season that we have had. But those short plants have good ears on them from a potential standpoint. Now let's say you have an 18 by 40 ear. Let's say we get enough moisture to pollinate that. Let's say you get enough moisture that you don't abort those kernels. Where could the yield, where could the negative yield impact of the stress that we've been through come in? Now, let's say this plant has slightly less leaf area than normal because leaf area is reduced by drought stress during vegetative growing periods. If the plant's just shorter, that doesn't really hurt the yield potential. If it's got less leaf area, that potentially does decrease photosynthesis. The total size of the plant, can impact how many resources it can reallocate from the plant to help finish the ear. So there are ways that those plants being smaller might have slight impacts on its ability to produce, the amount of grain, dry matter that it can produce. But those are insignificant compared to what stress during pollination and stress during kernel set and stress during early kernel development can do to that plant. So the next 4 weeks, roughly, are going to make or break this corn crop. It's been bent to this point. It has not been broke. If we flip a switch and we get a lot of moisture over the next 30 days, this crop can be good enough that you'll be shocked at how good it is. If we get no rain over the next 30 days, which is not likely, there's better chances in the forecast. So we're going to get some moisture. So I would say no rain over the next 30 days. That's not a possibility. That's not going to happen. I think it's very likely we won't get what we need over the next 30 days, but we're not going to get zero. But if we did get zero, you would be shocked at how bad some of this corn that looks good ends up being. So we've really got a pretty wide range of yield potential yet, which does not help you market. It does not help you sleep at night. It's not very helpful for somebody like me to say that, well, the yield potential of your corn somewhere between 60 and 240 bushel. Doesn't do you much good, right? You can be scared to death of the 60. You can be optimistic for the 240. You can hang out somewhere in between and hedge your bets. But that doesn't help you market. That doesn't help you do a lot. But unfortunately, that's the reality. This crop could still be pretty good. This crop could still be really bad. The next 4 weeks is what's going to make or break that. And I'm hoping, We caught a little rain yesterday at our place, about 3/10. You sure couldn't tell it rained 3/10 a few hours later, but that's what we had, and that's the biggest rain I've had in 2 months. I'll take it. It's appreciated. 3/10 a day would not replace the soil profile, but 3/10 a day would keep the crop going. I want a good soaker. I don't want to try to get by on 3/10 a day, because you're not going to get 3/10 every day. We need some good soaking rains. We need some inch plus rains. We need some days where we get more rain than the plant needs, and we can rebuild a little bit of cushion in the soil. We don't have to catch up. We don't have to make up for all the rain that we didn't get over the past 2 months, but we need, at a minimum, we need normal rain. Normal rain would be about 4.5 inches for the month of July, and about 3+ for the month of August. And it would be nice to get twice that, because that would, replace some of that deficit in the soil, to give us a little bit of cushion, to restock the shelves, so to speak, of the moisture that's been depleted from the soil, and give this crop the best opportunity to be all that it can be. Relative to that, let's talk about fungicide a little bit. So obviously, if this crop is as good as it has the potential to be, we should spray most acres of this crop with fungicide. We still have the potential for conditions to get wetter and more humid and more ideal for disease development. And we still have the potential for certain diseases to be a problem. Now, is gray leaf spot going to be really bad? Probably not. Is northern cornleaf blight going to be really bad? Highly unlikely. Are we going to have tar spot? Yes. Are we going to have enough tar spot to impact yield? I'm going to say probably not. The disease that has the most potential to still be yield limiting would actually be southern rust, in my opinion, because southern rust typically comes in late. Southern rust is driven primarily by July and August weather, and southern rust is a disease that does not overwinter here. It moves in every year from the south. So southern rust could still be bad. Now, a fungicide sprayed in July doesn't do much to control southern rust that starts in August. So if we get a late infection of southern rust, we may need a later season application to address that. If tar spot would happen to get started late, we may need a later season application to address that. I don't think that's likely, but it's not impossible. All of the talk recently with fungicides has been about stress mitigation. Why is everybody talking about stress mitigation? 2 reasons. We don't have any disease, so you can't really talk about that. And we got a hell of a lot of stress. So if you're going to invest in a fungicide, someone's going to tell you that you're doing it for stress mitigation purposes. Stress mitigation is real. Stress mitigation is a nice benefit of strobilurin fungicides. It's primarily coming from the strobies in these fungicide mixtures, less from the SDHI component and the triazole component. Those are more geared towards controlling particular diseases. And the stress mitigation piece is primarily driven by the strobies. Where I'm a little bit challenged right now with making that fungicide decision is a couple things. One, we don't need to make it yet. You've prepaid it, you've got it locked in, your supplier has it ready for you to go. I'm going to say, tassel time is still the time we want to make that decision. A lot of us are 2 weeks plus away from full tassel because this crop has been delayed by the dry weather conditions. So we've got time to wait and see if we're going to get a rain, and wait and see if the forecast says that we're going to keep getting rain. So, as I think as a farmer and as an agronomist, let's talk agronomy first. From an agronomy perspective, alleviating stress on that plant, helping it set kernels, helping it retain kernels, helping it rest more at night, those are all good things. There's plenty of data out there to support that those things are real. Those things do happen, and those things do increase yield potential of the crop during stressful periods. They don't increase potential, they increase the resulting yield of the crop. You keep more of your potential by alleviating stress. Now let's look at it from a farmer perspective or from an economic perspective. If you've got crop insurance and your proven yield is 210, and your crop makes is going to make 140 if you don't spray it, and 160 if you do. That's a 20 bushel response to fungicide due to stress mitigation. That's a big deal, but you're still well below your APH. You're still in a crop insurance indemnity situation. And depending on how good your APHs are, and depending on how high a level of coverage you selected, it may or may not make any sense to spray fungicide, even if it's going to increase your yield. So you need to factor that in. You need to be a realist about, what is my yield potential? Even though stress mitigation is a real thing, I tend to think fungicides have their biggest benefit when we are making a good crop better rather than trying to resurrect a bad one. They don't really work that way. And even if they do work that way, but you're below your APH, essentially what that application is going to do is save the government some money. If you're not insured, or if you're like me, I get accused of sometimes on the farm spending too much money on fertilizer, spending too much money on seed, spending too much money on attachments to make my planter better, spending too much money on technology to make my combine better. Nobody's ever going to accuse me of spending too much money on crop insurance. Crop insurance is a place where I think I can save money on my farm, not make money. The only way you're going to make money on crop insurance is if you're committing some sort of fraud, is my opinion. So I'm kind of a minimalist when it comes to my crop insurance coverage, and some of my farmer friends that are wealthy enough, I'm not even sure why they carry crop insurance, make fun of me for being a tight what on my crop insurance. And this is looking like it's a real good year to have bought the most crop insurance coverage that money can buy. If you're like me and you didn't do that, well, okay, maybe that makes more sense to continue investing in this crop. And I am a firm believer in not giving up on a crop. It's too early to give up on a crop. I don't want to give up on a crop, but at some point, logic will tell you it's time to give up on a crop. We're not there yet. I hope we don't get there. But if we do, and you're well insured, I think that needs to factor into your decision-making process on, how do you manage fungicides? At what point do you pull in the horns and say, hey, I'm gonna manage costs for the rest of this summer rather than trying to maximize yields? Because even if I maximize yield, my maximized yield is still lower than my crop insurance guarantee. And at that point, you might as well just let the insurance that you invested in be what's going to drive your income opportunity rather than your yield. There's lots of different schools of thought, lots of different opinions out there. There are lots of products that are getting recommended for stress mitigation. I did a trial on my farm a week ago tomorrow where we sprayed 4 different stress mitigation programs on some corn that really looked like it needed some stress mitigated. I can't see any visual differences yet in those treatments. Now maybe we're going to get some NDVI images off that crop. It's possible that some technology that can see things that my naked eye can't see will pick up some differences in those treatments. It could be that the benefit hasn't shown up yet. It could be that there won't be a benefit. I don't know. But there's lots of products getting recommended for stress mitigation. And if you ever wanted to try some of that stuff, it seems like this would be a good opportunity to try some of those products and see what we can learn if nothing else. So obviously, stress is going to drive yield. Stress always drives yield or detracts from yield. multiple stresses. We talk about this a lot. Multiple stresses are worse than individual stresses. So we've talked a lot about. I'm going to grab a picture here real quick. We've talked a lot about potassium deficiency symptoms this year, and obviously pretty easy to see. Potassium deficiency this year. Didn't have my good potassium deficiency picture as close as I thought to the top of the deck here. So you've obviously seen. Ooh, that reminds me of so here would be potassium deficiency in soybeans. So notice the new tissue on those beans, the new growth, the youngest growth, is not showing the symptomology near as much as the old growth is. If you inversed that to where the old leaves were green and the new leaves show those deficiency symptoms, that's not potassium. That's either a micronutrient or possibly some herbicide carryover that's giving you that look. Here would be another picture that, classic potassium deficiency symptom. Potassium is mobile in the plant. The plant can reallocate potassium from the old leaves to the new. Now, at some point, if it lingers long enough, the whole plant's potassium deficient, because when it first starts, the new growth is screaming for more potassium than the plant can supply. So it steals it from the old leaves, gives it to the young leaves. And for a short time, that was enough to keep those young leaves green. Eventually, if we don't get a rain or we don't get some potassium freed up in that soil somehow, the plant's going to run out of leaves on the plant to steal potassium from. And the whole plant is going to be deficient in potassium. And I've seen that in lots of cases. I've seen that in some corn. The picture that this is some bad TV here as I look for pictures of this potassium deficient corn, and there's a good rootless corn pic. So we were talking about rootless corn earlier. So that's what true rootless corn looks like. You can see how that seed furrow cracked back open, and those plants are falling over because they've got no nodal roots whatsoever. We were very fortunate that we had enough moisture early in the growing season. Generally speaking, unless you planted really late, or you had a seed furrow that cracked back open, you didn't have to deal with rootless corn. One of the saddest things you'll ever see. There's a good close up of a rootless corn plant. You can see the only root system that plant has. That right there is the mesocotyl, or right here is the mesocotyl. And you can see how that mesocotyl is normally white. It's not white because that seed furrow split back open and there's sunlight getting down into the seed trench. But the only root system that plant has is the seed roots. You can still see the seed right there. So sad. Don't want to see that. There's a close-up of it. The nodal roots look pretty funky when that happens because they're trying to grow, but they can't. They get really stubby. They look like they've been burned off by some sort of herbicide injury, or maybe eaten off, but it's neither of those. They were not able to grow. There's three things roots cannot grow into. They cannot grow into air. That's what these were trying to do. They cannot grow into dry soil, and they cannot grow into soil that is super, super, super hard. Other than that, roots will grow. There, finally. Okay. So this is kind of the classic thing you see driving up and down the roads, the outside edges of cornfields showing potassium deficiency symptoms. I got a close up here of what those plants. I bumped my iPad. That happens a lot with my big fat fingers. And when I bumped it, it moved to the wrong picture. So I'm going to try to get back to there we go. That's the picture I was trying to show you. These plants have been dealing with two primary stresses. First primary stress would be lack of potassium. Secondary primary stress would be the dry weather. Stress 1 and stress 2 are related to each other. Dry soils are horrible at supplying potassium. But if your dry soil has been supplying enough potassium that the plant hasn't had to deal with being deficient, it's going to be far better off than if it has been dealing with two stresses, potassium deficiency and the dry weather. So I was going to show a chart here. If I can find it real quick. This one. So this is a good illustration of why we see so much potassium deficiency in corn and why it's so bad this year and why it shows up when it shows up. So if you look at those three nutrient uptake curves for nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium, which one of them is uptaken in the largest amount earliest in the season? Of those three nutrients, that would be potassium. Most of the potassium in the corn plant is retained in the stalk and the vegetative tissue. And most of the potassium that the corn plant needs is to build the stalk and the vegetative tissue. So that's why corn, when you harvest corn as grain, does not use near as much potassium as soybeans because there's very little potassium in the grain. Now, if you harvest a forage crop, so if you harvest corn as silage, that uses a tremendous amount of potassium. If you bale your corn stalks right after harvest, that uses a tremendous amount of potassium because you're taking all the potassium that was in the entire plant, not just what's in the grain. But potassium is uptaken very early in the season and is uptaken in very large amounts early in the season to grow all the vegetative tissue. And this year we got dry so early. You know, this is a unique drought for us. I brought this. I didn't have time to update this, so I apologize. So this is current as of about a week ago, and we have gotten some rain in the past week. But this chart compares rainfall by month for three crop years: 1988, 2012, and 2023. So you can see for the total, and this goes back, this is total precip since January 1. So total precip, you can see we've had more moisture this year than we did in those two infamous drought years. However, the additional moisture that we got this year versus those two previous years primarily came in February and March. And you can see that looking at that third column there on the chart. April was pretty normal rainfall for this year. This is for my farm where I live, which is about halfway between London Mills and Fairview. So obviously this data is all coming out of climate. You can generate this data for yourself for every field, not just every farm, but every field you have in your climate account. And we're going to talk about a little contest that we're going to run here for the next 2 weeks. And I'll tell you how to do this in a minute. And then when you get to May, things start to change. So May on my farm this year was 1.5 inches of rain, and June, as of a week ago, was 1700s. So May and June were significantly drier this year for a lot of us than 1988 and 2012 were. Now, that doesn't mean that this year is going to be worse than 88 and 12, because what ruined 88 and 12 was July. July is the make or break month for corn. You'll also notice that August was a lot wetter than July, and that's something that's very important relative to soybeans. But it almost doesn't matter what happened in May and June for corn. I say almost because, we talked about the potassium situation. There's other things, rootless corn. I mean, you can ruin a corn crop in May and June, but you got to do something pretty extreme to it. So this stuff that's short, stunted, flowering late, doesn't look real awesome, but it's got a good embryonic ear. That crop hasn't been ruined yet. It's going to take a dry July to ruin that crop. If we don't get a dry July, relatively little harm done to that crop, to be quite honest with you, compared to, what its true potential is. So, July is going to be the make or break month. If it turns around and we get a wet July, we're not going to have a repeat of 88 or 2012. If we follow this May and June with the July that we had in either of those 2 years, that will be really, 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 really bad. And modern genetics have improved the plant's ability to handle stress. If we were given the exact same weather pattern today that we had in 88 or 12, with today's genetics, we would raise a better crop than we did in 88 or 12. No doubt in my mind of that. However, if we get worse weather than we had in 88 or 12, which for us to have worse weather than we had those 2 years would mean we'd have to have a July that was as dry as those Julys were, but we had a May and June that was drier this year than those years were, we may not produce any more yield than we did in 88 or 12, even with modern genetics, because the potential exists for us to have worse weather from a dryness standpoint than we did in either of those 2 years. Now, I hope that doesn't happen. Really, really hope that doesn't happen. We've got better chances of rainfall here over the next week to 10 days. We need more than a chance of rainfall. We need rainfall. We've had lots of chances over the previous month that have not materialized or have not been generally widespread rains. I know individual fields that have caught 1.5 inches of rain. The rest of that township caught nothing or 0.2. So, we don't know where we're going to end up yet. So I see a question come in there. Would you be worried at all about corn standability if the rain turns back on with the lack of potassium early? Okay, so that's a good question. I think you could conceivably end up in a situation. So let's say this happens. Let's say we have perfect conditions from here on out. Let's say we fill the potential ear that we've got. And let's say we've got a plant with reduced photosynthetic capabilities because it's got less leaf area than it would have if it was full size. That's a scenario where you potentially end up with bad stalk quality because you are going to that plant's going to cannibalize itself to finish that ear. That's a scenario where disease pressure impacting the leaf health of that plant would increase the stalk quality issues. So it kind of depends on what yield level are we at. If we don't get through pollination well and you end up with half an ear, and then like we did in those 2 famous previous drought years, you end up with a wet August, that corn will stand till Christmas because it's not going to be working very hard late during grain fill because it's got such a small ear. And then you're going to have excess sugar buildup in the stalk. You're going to have no stalk quality issues. You're going to have no standability issues. So standability issues, stalk cannibalization issues, those are typically associated with high yields, and they're also associated with poor plant health. If you've got healthy, high-yielding corn, probably going to be okay. If you've got healthy, low-yielding corn, it's definitely going to be okay. But that scenario where you've got high-yielding corn under stress that maybe has compromised plant health, that's when you get a lot of stalk cannibalization issues, and you'll run into potentially, issues like that. So It's possible. I don't know that I consider it to be likely. Frankly, most of the corn that has been significantly deficient in potassium, like those pictures I showed you, that corn isn't going to yield enough to worry about standability. If that corn falls over, the piddly amount of yield that was on it, not going to significantly increase or decrease the yield of the field. So hopefully your places with horrible potash deficiency or just a little bit along the edge that makes the field look horrible as you drive by, but it's not impacting a significant number of the acres, or maybe it's a pocket here or there, but it's not the whole field. I have seen some whole fields that look like that. Those are sad. That's not going to end well, no matter how much it rains. Those fields tend to be some unique soil types or have a history of ever being a hay field. Any field that's ever been in hay production in the last 20 years, pretty easy to spot those. Almost nobody, probably not even me, puts on enough potassium, especially if you've got decent alfalfa, to maintain soil K-test levels in a hay field. I see another question's come in. Why is increasing levels of tillage intensity showing such? Yes, good question, Noah. Thank you. So this is frustrating for a good no-tiller like myself. There is more moisture in the soil profile of a high residue no-till field than there is in a low residue field or a tilled field. But you wouldn't think that based on the way a crop looks. And it all goes back to root depth and root mass. So what happened in our high residue farming situations this year is the plant was growing more slowly, which is common. The roots were growing more slowly, which is common. Normally those plants catch up and really no harm is done just because they were growing a little more slowly. This year, the soil dried out so much and so fast and got so hard and so dry. And we talked earlier about how roots can't grow into dry soil. So I'm gonna irritate some people. I'm gonna probably make some people mad. I'm gonna probably make people think that I'm not very damn smart. Corn roots do not grow deeper when it's dry. Corn does not root down better when it's dry, and corn roots do not grow to moisture. And I know that those three statements probably making some of your heads explode. I can feel the shock waves coming across the internet from all the heads exploding right now. Now, it's also true that corn roots do not grow well in wet soils. So the saying "a dry June makes good corn" is true relative to the fact that a wet June makes bad corn. So corn roots grow because corn roots grow. Corn roots grow down until something stops them. They can be stopped by hard soil that can't be penetrated. They can be stopped by water. They can be stopped by a lack of oxygen. They can be stopped by dry soils. Barring those three things, corn's going to root down to about the same depth every year. And so the notion that corn will go after water is a misnomer. Corn is not thinking about the fact that it's dry, so I need more roots. Its roots are going to explore the soil profile until something prevents them from exploring the soil profile. Our no-till fields, unfortunately, something prevented the roots from exploring the soil profile. So if you had the ability to dig up the roots in a no-till field, you're going to find that there's less root mass there than there is in a tilled field, not because there's less water there, but because the roots got deeper faster on the tilled ground because they were growing faster and they got ahead of the dry soil. They got ahead of the hard soil. They were able to explore more of the soil profile, and that's what's going on with the no-till fields. I've got a whole list of things that we might get to here in a minute. I've got a whole list of things that look good in 2023 and an equal list of kind of the inverse of things that look bad in 2023. And unfortunately for we no-till advocates, one of the things that can look bad in 2023 is no-till, and certainly high residue looks even worse. It's not a good year for cover crops either. So there's some practices out there that this year is not going to agree with. And unfortunately, there's probably going to be some people that make maybe the wrong decision of giving up on a practice or not trying a practice because of something they see in this year. And this is such an extreme year. We've had droughts before. We've had worse droughts than this, but I don't know that we've ever had a drought this severe this early. And that's what's unique about this year, is how early we got dry. And that's primarily what's driving that. So while we're on that subject of things that look good and bad this year, we got about 10 minutes left, unless I go over time, which, as you all know, I'm happy to go over time. So we might do that. But I would say here's my list of things that look good in 2023. So Noah, to your question, the first thing on my list, more tillage looks good in 2023. Less residue looks good in 2023. And those two things are kind of related. And even if you're doing tillage, and even if you're doing a lot of tillage, the residue is still there. So I'll tell you what looks even better than tillage is if you planted any corn this year or beans, either one, on ground that didn't produce anything last year. Or maybe you took silage off of it, or you baled corn stalks off of it, or you had a field fire that took all the residue away and there was no residue whatsoever. That looks the best, honestly. Planting early, there were a lot of questions, a lot of debate, a lot of experts weighing in on, all the early planting that was going on last year. And there were times I was accused by people of not promoting early planting as aggressively as some other people. I was kind of in the middle. There were people to the left of me, people to the right of me. And unfortunately, the folks that were being super patient this year on planting date, also not a good decision, the way things have turned out. The people that were being aggressively early, maybe even crazy early for some people's thinking, that stuff is the best looking stuff around at this point in time. Now, how much better it's going to be, don't know. But early planting definitely looks good. Probably going to be hard to keep everybody from going crazy early next time we get an opportunity to go crazy early. Starter fertilizer on planter looks phenomenal this year. So you guys that use starter on planter, you're feeling good about that investment. I'll tell you, the other thing looks awesome this year is strip till with fertility in the strip. More than just the strip, having the fertilizer in the strip, that looks awesome. So that soil rooting environment was pretty good there, and the nutrients were easy for the plant to get right underneath it. Didn't take too much for the roots to get into that. Front loading your nitrogen looks great this year. Going to be a tough year for side dress in. Side dressing is great in a wet year. Side dressing is not good in a drought. It pains me to say that side dressing is a great practice. Side dressing is something that takes a lot of work and costs you more money. And when your corn yields less because you side dressed it, that sucks. That's going to happen this year in some cases. Sulfur. The more sulfur you use, the better your crop looks. And I think the better your crop will be this year. Productive soils. We talked about that earlier. There is in a year like this, there is no replacement for having good ground with organic matter and more water holding capacity. Anything you did, whether it was intentional or just dumb luck, that decreased compaction, really, really, really good this year. And we get a lot of compaction from things that people don't think of as a compaction tool. Planters are amazingly good compaction tools. Vertical tillage tools done at the wrong time can be a really good compaction tool. They also reduce residue, so that's both good and bad for this year. See, we had another question come in. Do you see a difference between shallow strip till and deeper knife strip? Yes, I do. So I don't know what people refer to as shallow. I'm going to say shallow strip till is you're making a strip with a coulter rather than a knife, perhaps. So yeah, I think I do see a benefit to the knife this year because you had a deeper, loosened soil profile. And I think a knife in the fall creates a much better rooting environment than coulters in the spring. There's also a benefit to their strip till that there's only nitrogen in the strip. There's strip till that has the full meal deal in the strip. That's the best. Nitrogen only in the strip is better. Making the strip itself is better than not having the strip. So it's kind of a continuum there. You've got no strip, you've got a strip with no fertility, you got a strip with only nitrogen, and you got a strip with everything. And that's kind of the continuum that I see. And then the last thing I had on my list of things that are good in 2023, making post herbicide applications early. I could get up on that soapbox pretty easy. Does need to be a very sturdy soapbox for me to be on it. But this year, we should have sprayed almost every acre post about a week to 10 days before we did. Corn, beans, both. We need to spray earlier. And this year in a drought situation, that's really, 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 really evident, because the more drought stress weeds got, the bigger weeds got, the dustier conditions got. Things just got tougher to kill. People didn't want to go early. They were worried about, the crop's too small. It's too early in the season. More weeds going to come up later. People can come up with all kinds of excuses why it's better to wait. It's almost never better to wait when it comes to making herbicide applications. So make them early. So the inverse of that list of things that look good this year, here's my list of things that look bad in 2023. Waiting to plant looks bad. Spring UAN looks pretty bad. So if your nitrogen is all shallow in the field and you've got roots that are down deep, but nitrogen that's at the top, and your nitrogen is laying in dry soil at the top, even if you didn't lose it, even if it got securely attached to the soil, if your nitrogen is in the top 2 inches of the field, primarily because you haven't had enough moisture to move it down, your roots that are feeding the plant are down deep, because that's the only place there's any moisture. And if your nitrogen is primarily shallow in the field, that plant's not going to be able to get the nitrogen that it's looking for. So those fields tend to look a little tougher. Side dress nitrogen fields look tougher. Now, if you're putting on 80-90% of your nitrogen pre-plant and side dressing for a little extra kick, that looks great. Your side dress extra kick may do nothing for your corn crop, but you had enough on early that the corn crop didn't suffer. Guys that put on a high percentage of their nitrogen as side dress, that stuff, that's going to be a tougher situation. So this kind of relates to that, putting out a low rate of nitrogen before planting. So if you put on 20 or 30% of your N prior to planting, and then you plan on putting the rest on through the growing season, that's tough. And unless you've been in a spot that's been catching a lot of rain. No-till in general looks pretty tough this year. Corn and soybeans both. Cover crops look pretty tough this year. Corn and soybeans both. Any soils that are compacted looks terrible this year. And that compaction could have come from anything. Could come from traffic patterns from last fall. Could have come from sprayer tracks. Could have come from the planter. Could have come from tillage. Could have come from anything. But whatever compacted your soil, that's rough. Lighter, lower organic matter soils. This is a year you cannot make up for lack of organic matter. You cannot make up for lack of plant available water in your soil. And if you're farming light timber soil, it's just going to be tough. That's why that stuff doesn't cost as much as the good stuff. It's not as good as the good stuff. In years like this, there's no hiding that. This one kind of relates back to the not making post herbicide applications early. I'm going to tease my competitors a little bit. They're in love with their freedom to spray slogan. So I'm going to say exercising your freedom to spray too late was a bad idea this year. I think that's always a bad idea. It's an even worse idea this year. And then I'm going to say not aggressively managing residue. So there's lots of ways to aggressively manage residue. You can aggressively manage residue with tillage. You can aggressively manage residue with row cleaners on your planter. You can aggressively manage residue by removing it. You can aggressively manage residue by harvesting early and enabling more residue degradation, over the winter and through the growing season. Lots of different ways you can aggressively manage residue, but we had tremendous residue production in 2022, especially in corn, with our high yielding, very healthy, great late season plant health corn crop that we raised in 2012. We had a lot of very fresh, healthy residue to contend with spring of 2023. And that was a challenge for plants to get off to a fast start, get quick root development, getting off to a fast start, getting roots developed quickly. That was critical this year for getting ahead of the drought. Our high residue fields could never get ahead of the drought. They're still trying to catch up. And this was a horrible year to be playing catch up because it kept getting worse and worse and worse and worse as we went through the growing season. And there was no opportunity for those fields to ever catch up. So that is my list. Now I will say this. Here's the take home part of this. I really do not think a year that has never happened before and is not likely to happen again anytime soon is a year that we want to start farming for this kind of year. So if you've been a successful no-tiller for 30 years, you should stay a good no-tiller. If you've been really enthusiastic about what cover crops are doing on your farm, you should continue to do cover crops on your farm. If you have never, ever, ever strip tilled in your life, you don't have to go out and buy your own $200,000 strip till bar because of what we're seeing this year. Now, are we going to learn some things this year that you could maybe adopt as a new practice on your farm? Or do you want to tweak something in your system? That's good. We learn things every year. But I would say let's not get crazy about abandoning practices that look bad this year or adopting practices aggressively that look good this year, because the extremeness of this year is record setting. There are places on paths. I'm on track to have, even though I had 3/10 of rain, the 3/10 I got yesterday, I'm up to 47 hundredths of rain for the month of June at my home farm. That would be the driest June on record, at that location. And when you're setting records, obviously it's pretty damn extreme, right? Weather records go back 140 years, probably back to the late 1800s. This is the first time in 140 years we've had this weather. I'll take that bet. We're not going to have that same weather again next year. Pretty safe bet, I would say. So anyway, with that, oh shoot, I didn't mention. Okay, so speaking of the dry June, so I won't go into details of how to do this. I've done this on previous episodes, but we are going to have a contest. So everybody that submits to their FSR or to me live in the chat here prior to the next Ask the Agronomist, a screenshot of a field in your farming operation showing the least amount of accumulated rainfall for the month of June is going to get a prize. I can't win because I'm not eligible to participate. It's a good thing for you all because I'd have a pretty good chance of winning that contest. But so I would say to have a chance of winning that contest, you need to have had less than a half-inch of rain in the month of June. You need to go into climate and find that past weather report in climate. And you can pick the driest field in your operation, but it needs to be a field in your operation, and submit a screenshot of the total accumulated rainfall for the month of month of June, not July. So today is what, the 29th? So we're close to the end of June here. And so after June has ended, go into Climate at climate.com on your computer. Don't try to do it on your phone. Do it from your desktop. Go to climate.com. Go into the past weather report. Find a weather report for your driest field for the month of June. Submit a screenshot of that to your FSR or live on Ask the Agronomist, and we're going to collect those. And I don't know what we're going to give for a prize. It won't be a life-changing amount of money. I can guarantee you that. Might not be free seed. I don't know what we're going to do. Maybe we'll give you a wheel and tire to the irrigation rig that you're thinking of buying for next year, or I don't know what we'll do, but we'll do something fun, just as a little fun contest. I'm going to call it my Misery Loves Company Driest June on Record contest. And we're going to do that here on Ask the Agronomist. And so get those pulled after June is over, and get those submitted. We will be back with you on July 13th for our next Ask the Agronomist. That would be 2 weeks from today, and hoping to whoever you want to hope to that we've had a lot of rain between today and then. And people are optimistic for the potential of their crop. We'll talk more about soybeans probably in the next episode. Once the corn crop is either safe or destroyed, we can focus on soybeans. But I did mean to mention earlier, I showed that. So look at that August weather there from those 2 previous drought years. If you look back to your farm average soybean yields from 1988 and 2012, soybeans were by far the better crop in those 2 drought years. Soybeans are more drought tolerant, would be reason number one that they do better in a drought year. And they have their critical point in their life is different timing. And as this shows, dry July ruins corn, wet August benefits soybeans. So soybean yield potential is, essentially unimpacted at this point by the weather that we've had. They would like a rain too. They would like to be able to grow vegetatively more than they've been able to, but we could still have a very, very good soybean crop. So we'll talk more about fungicide management in soybeans as we get a little bit deeper into the growing season. But even if we don't get rain in time to save the corn, and even if you all give up on fungicide on corn, which I know you're not going to, but even if you did, that might not be the right decision for soybeans. Different situation, different animal, totally different discussion, and we'll save that discussion maybe for a future episode. So apologize for going a little bit long here this morning. Hope you enjoyed the conversation. Appreciate the questions coming in on the chat. Next time, hopefully I'll have some help here in studio so things go a little more smoothly. Let's see. I think I've showed all the pictures I wanted to show, and I talked about everything I wanted to talk about. So we're going to go ahead and sign off for today. I appreciate your time and attention. Everybody stay safe. Everybody get some good soaking rains, and we'll see you in 2 weeks. Thanks.